First and foremost, Lida is the founder and CEO of Cēlandaire Capital, with over 25 years of experience in the Canadian capital markets. A recognized sustainability expert, she advises investors on responsible opportunities, corporate readiness, and global policy. Lida has a strong record of leadership in climate finance, women's economic empowerment, and policy recommendations to G20 leaders through their work with the B20 and the Sustainable Business COP30 Transition Finance Working Group. She regularly speaks at international forums, including COP28 and the UN's Financing for Development, and serves on the board of Transparency International Canada. Let me formally welcome Lida to the stage today with a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So obviously based with your background in finance and capital markets, we're going to start our discussion there, just talking a bit about the transition or crossover, I should say, between capital markets and some of the topics we've discussed today around ESG and sustainability. So let's start from a more macro perspective and talk about capital flows. And Lida, from your perspective, how has the flow of private capital evolved on a global scale over recent years, especially in light of initiatives like the G20 and UN climate commitments?
Well, thank you, and thank you to the CSE for bringing us all together for this important topic and for inviting me to share some of my views. It's a very good question. So private capital, it has evolved, and it's evolved in its thinking towards sustainable finance. And partly that's because in various stages and in different geographies, they're realizing that this is actually the biggest business opportunity of our lifetime. There are trillions of dollars that are needed in short order in order for us to be able to fulfill the needs to really just keep the planet going, right? It's not even to make it fully better, if that's even something that's possible. But there are trillions of dollars that are needed, and there are some fantastic innovations that are coming out. And we've heard from a lot of pretty cool companies here today, and we'll be talking to them up on the rooftop as well. So you've got some really innovative ideas, and private money is now, it's waking up. But we're going to take that private money and put it into two categories. So you have the category of, let's call it 0 to 50 million. And then you've got the category of 50 million plus. And if we start off with the first category of 0 to 50 million, this is where you're going to find your angels, your syndicates, your family offices. And this is also where you're going to find your patient capital, which is what sustainable finance requires. Because we're not looking at quarterly reporting. You've got some of the philanthropic agencies here who can sustain some losses. Family offices and angels aren't very keen on losses, but they've got the time to give, and that's why we call it patient capital. If we go up to the macro level, so for the 50 million plus, and then some in between too, and we go to the G20 and COP. So I'm going to level set a little bit. So the G20, we all hear about, we've had different meetings in Canada. The G7 is actually coming up in about a week's time in Kananaskis. And this is where a lot of decisions are made that then will trickle down. It used to take about 4 years to trickle down to the national level, but now we're looking at sort of the 2 to 3 year range. And what they've done at the G20 is they've created the B20, which is the business engagement arm of the G20. And what the companies that are there are looking to do is provide policy recommendations to the G20 to commit to that are actually workable and implementable for business to help with global economic growth, which is the main goal. So they have different task forces. I sit on the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force. Sustainability is a theme that runs through the whole thing. So our 3 recommendations there, we're looking at how to have more investable projects, also how to increase the flow of private capital, and then on the 3rd recommendation, it's how do you bring those 2 things together. Then I'm going to move us, and actually on the finance and infrastructure part, the G20 has also created an infrastructure hub. And so companies from anywhere in the world can go to the hub. The country governments have put on this hub already approved projects in infrastructure in different countries so that people who want to invest, here's a place they can go to start to look. And I also just want to level set on the COP part. So COP is the United Nations Conference of the Parties. It happens every year, usually in the November, December timeframe, and the number that goes to the back of it is how many times people have met. And by people, I mean governments and organizations. They make commitments there too. The Paris Agreement everybody hears about, that was a COP initiative. And so last year, COP29 was in Baku, Azerbaijan. This year it's in Belém, Brazil. This year it's also the first year of a 5-year cycle. Last year, as you can imagine, in Baku, not much was agreed to. Baku doesn't really have a lot of political capital to get things moving, and it's the 5th year of a 5-year cycle. So this is the year that we're going to look for something measurable to come out of it. But what the Brazilians have also done is decided that business is very important for action. And so they've created a sustainable business COP. And this is not really about meeting and providing policy recommendations, or they're going to do that too, but they want to have actual action items. So they're bringing the business community together, 1, to create an equity product, 2, to create a debt product, and to see how we can open up some of the barriers for bringing like-minded investors together.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's a worldwide opportunity, but also a challenge to bring all these different governments and interest groups together to just make an economy out of this. So it leads me to my next question, which is emerging markets. So you mentioned the G20, but obviously emerging markets have a ton of opportunity, also a ton of risk. Where do you see the opportunities, but also barriers into promoting investment into those ecosystems?
It's a really good question, and the emerging markets is where a lot of the money really needs to flow, because the impact of each dollar is going to be greater. And quite frankly, they bear a lot more of the burden of climate change than the Western countries have so far. And they don't have the dollars. If a small island gets wiped out because of a hurricane that's come through, they don't have the dollars, like they don't have a FEMA to, be able to draw on, because they just don't have the population to put funding into anything like that in any event. The problem with emerging markets is that there is a lot of risk. There's regulatory and legal risk, there's foreign exchange risk, there's corruption risk. So this is where things like, and financial mechanisms like blended finance might come in. So what we really need to do is look at the different instruments that are out there, and collaboration and partnership to share the risk, to be able to have more money flow into the emerging markets. But globally, it is where the money's going.
Right, and so what's your call to action to the private sector to get involved in these opportunities? Like, what would you say the most effective strategies would be to get them in? Is it just through, like you said, big funds, or is it through promoting small companies and startups to create new cos and go into these markets and try to execute projects? What's your advice there?
I think there's a lot of different ways that that we can all participate in helping the emerging markets and getting funds flowing. Part of it would be, and we have to get innovative, right? We can't just take the same old financial instruments and expect them to work. Right. The other side of it is, however, is that risk. So for example, the corruption risk. Corruption risk needs to change, because let's say a bank decides that they're going to announce, we're putting $150 million towards sustainable finance projects in emerging markets. If there is any corruption that takes place, and listen, corruption is everywhere. It's not just in the emerging markets. But when corruption takes place or money laundering takes place, they're looking at fines in the home country, in the country where the money flows to, and if there's a US dollar nexus from the US regulator. So you have the potential to be fined, 10x your investment. And so, a lot of financial institutions aren't going to look there because they can't take that risk. But the problem is, who is getting these funds from corruption are the very same people who have to change the laws in order to change it. So when you're working with multilateral development banks, they have a lot of experience in dealing with putting together parameters around investment vehicles. So really, for the private sector in emerging markets, I think a really great way to go is to work in a fund and in collaboration.
Okay, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but Can we just talk a bit about what your initiatives are at Cēlandaire? Because I think it encapsulates a lot of the opportunity, but also challenges that both the finance and the issuer side are coming to a head on with respect to ESG and entering new markets and managing that risk. So maybe just touch a bit about your company and what you guys are working on.
Well, I think what I'd like to do, in fact, is take a look at, we've talked a lot about the resource sector here and, what we can do or what Canada needs to do in order to grow its economy here. And I mean, we just had the First Minister's meeting on Monday with the Prime Minister and all the premiers, and everybody came with their list of what they wanted as far as projects go. So if I'm going to take pipelines as an example, so I'll be a little bit more illustrative. And if I take a look at some of the companies that Cēlandaire is working with, and then I might throw in a couple that I already heard today here too. Like if you look at a pipeline, you are going to be disturbing the ground, right? But what if you were to use, and we'll go company that creates organic graphene that can take out 15 to 20% of the cement that's used in concrete. So now you have fewer GHG emissions just from the construction material of this pipeline. Now, you've disturbed the earth. What we need now is we need to have some reforestation because carbon capture, some of the largest carbon capture happens through nature and forests. So why don't we, one of our companies creates pots that helps genetically entice the seedlings to make better genetic choices to have bigger roots, grow faster, and have a greater survivability rate of like 90 to 95%. They were one of, on Earth Day's podcast, Root Maker.
Yep.
So now what you're doing is you're going behind the project. You've got some trees that you're either foresting or maybe it's reforestation if you've disturbed some of the forests. Now, if we go to the oil and gas sector, what if we do a carbon capture? There's a Canadian company. They capture the carbon from heavy industries, let's call them. Let's go with oil and gas because that's what we're talking about. And they can turn that into farm-grade carbon, which can then be put into the soil. So now we're doing a bit of a cyclical economy where we're going to help out our farmers and our agriculture sector in order to have soil that helps with flood and drought resistance. Right. And that can all happen. And I think another thing I'd like to touch on is, Indigenous consultation it's vital and it has to be right from the beginning because they were the stewards of the land for millennia. And when you assemble people for a project, you bring in experts. We all do this, we bring in experts for everything. I don't go to my doctor and talk to him about my tax return, right? And so what we have to do is we have to think differently about our Indigenous consultation, and we have to look at them as the experts at the table. And that way, you bring together all of your experts right from the start in order for projects to move forward.
Yeah, they're not just rote obligations or, things that are going to get in your way of your project. They can be additive and be a benefit to your stakeholders and your end investors, because ultimately that's what we're trying to serve as well, right?
Yeah, and they are the stakeholders.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And they're going to bring the expertise to your project in order to make it happen. And I mean, we've had a myriad of clean energy projects or deals that have been green-lighted over the last few weeks across the country with Indigenous participation.
Yeah, well, that's a great note to end on. We could be here all day talking, and I know that you've got a lot to add to the conversation. So we'll see you upstairs, and thanks so much, Lida, for joining us today on this Summit on Responsible Investment.
Thank you for having me.